Mm. Hi, my name is Sheisa Tapia, and these are the slides that I made for the class application syntax. So for number one, it asks us to select one type of instructional activity from the chapter that we read and then to like redesign it based on the specific audience that we have. So as I have it written here, I chose to redesign one specific one, which is teach critical terms for phrases and their heads. This is taking in mind a class of Spanish speaking intermediate emergent bilingual students. um, as I talk, it's going to include adaptations, scaffolding, and support to suit their learning context. So, what do they need to do based on the activity that I'm going to give them? What do they need to do for that activity? So, for this activity, students need to be able to identify and group words into phrases. They need to classify phrases as noun, verb, or prepositional. They need to identify the head, or in other words, the most important word in each phrase. So, this is what they need to be able to do for this activity to do it well. And then to continue, they also need to recognize functions of each phrase. For example, if it's like the subject, if it's the action, if it's telling where, when, what, and so much more. What do they need to know beforehand? So before I give them this activity and I want them to do this specific thing and enhance these specific skills, what do they need to know beforehand or what do they need to have mastered before we do this activity or this content or this lesson? So, before students can successfully complete this activity that focuses on English phrases and their heads, they need to be able to do, or like I said, master these language objectives beforehand, such as identify parts of speech like noun, verb, preposition. Obviously, if they don't understand what that is beforehand, they're not going to be able to identify those certain phrases in a sentence. They also need to understand basic sentence structure in English, which the most common one is subject, verb, object. They need to understand the role of the head in determining the meaning of a phrase. To continue, they need to recognize common nouns and verb forms in English, basic parts of speech. I just kind of summarize with that. They need to be able to understand and be able to identify nouns, what is a noun, what is a verb, what is an object, what's a preposition, things like that. Because if they don't know how to do that or what that is, even, how are they going to be able to do it by themselves? They also need to identify prepositions and prepositional phrases. For example, like in the park, at the school. They need to practice sentence checking, so grouping words that go together, scaffolded with visuals or color coding. I personally really like color coding, and I also use a lot of visuals to follow with it. And then lastly, compare phrase structures in English and Spanish. That really helps students to see that there are differences, but there are very similar things that can also help them in order to understand better. Furthermore, these are just some things that I would review. I always like to review a little bit, especially when we are advancing to something else where we're using skills that we already did and we're going to challenge them a little bit more. So I tend to have examples like the one presented here where it's like it talks about noun, it just reminds them that a noun is a person, and I give examples like, like Jane or like students, like they are students themselves, that's a noun. Types of people, boy, girl, titles and roles, and then I usually always love having pictures to follow with it. Noun is also a place. I tend to use places also in the school to connect it a little bit more, and places that they go outside of school, like the park. And then also things that they have, things that they use, things that they want. And then also things that they don't, things that aren't necessarily physical, like happiness, love. To continue, I also review verbs, especially if we're talking about the present, past, and future. The slides that I'm showing here are just examples of many that I have where I define them explicitly, but I also have pictures to go along with it. And then depending on what the conversation is while I'm doing this, I tend to grab from what I had that day. For example, if a student is doing, something in the class, maybe I'll put a verb out there so they can see, oh, look, Tommy is doing X, Y, and Z. Or perhaps, Samantha did X, Y, and Z in the past, and then show them how that can change. Adjectives. So again, reviewing. Adjectives describe nouns, not verbs. They can come before or after the noun. For example, the green frog jumps or the man is old. So again, these are just examples of things that I would review, which for many people they might feel like it's basics, like there's no reason to review. But again, I personally have the model that it's not gonna hurt if we review even for like the first 2 minutes just to make sure that everyone is on the right page and everyone understands and has the opportunities to ask questions. All right, so to continue. So explain how you, or in this case, how I would adapt the activity for students from my imagined language. In this case, it would be for Spanish speaking students, and include a way to build students' mental linguistic awareness related to how the syntax of English compares with the way this feature works in their additional language. It may be the same or different. So, a way I would adapt the activity, which is reading sentences, grouping words that go together in a phrase, and deciding whether certain parts or phrases are noun phrases, aka answering or what is done, being done to, verb phrases telling about the action of state of being, or prepositional phrase telling when, where, or what the verb is about. As well as focusing on the head of each phrase, I will do it more visually and color coded. So in the chapter, it talks about how you can read the sentences and then, have students do it where they're identifying themselves, but I usually always like to make it more visual, more hands-on in color code just so they can visualize it a little bit better instead of just reading the sentence, doing it, and then just moving on. So first, I always start with the basics. So I would write simple sentences such as the dog ran in the yard or my sister's playing guitar. I usually try to include the students in the sentences so they can see their names up there or things that they had done before. Like if a student's name is like Mary and maybe, they always do their work, maybe I'll do something like Mary is doing her work, something like that. Or, if I have a kid that loves to talk and he's really funny, I might say something like Pablo is talking, something like that. So these are just examples of what I would show or similar sentences that I would use, in that sort of same format. It is bracketed, but usually I would bracket it and then I would have like a color. So for example, for the noun, it would be like a specific color. For the verb, it will be a different color. And then for the the preposition in the rest of the sentence, it will be another color. And these same colors will be the ones that we will use throughout the lesson. So for example, the dog ran in the yard. My brother is reading a book. The tall girl walked to school. I would also, of course, explicitly tell them what each phrase is about, followed by modeling. So I will start with simple sentences, do the same thing that we have done previously, dividing it, identifying what it is, and the importance in the sentence. And then, of course, I would tie it into what I want them to do, which is explaining how, this is a noun phrase, how it's a group of words that tell who or what, includes a noun and the word described. And then again, I always add at least one example or more along with a picture. Verb phrase tells what is happening or what someone is doing, may include helping verbs or an action word. For example, is running. And again, another picture so they understand what the example is talking about. And prepositional phrase tells where, when, or how something happens. It begins with a preposition and ends with a noun or pronoun, like in the park. To make it more hands-on, so after we modeled, right? So after I teach them this, I probably would have like more examples of this, like a big dog, um, is running, is talking, is swimming, all of that in the park or at the school or at a specific time. I would usually have more examples with more pictures and then have them practice, identifying it in the sense of like, oh, well, why is this and now? What are we talking about? Oh, okay. And then have them have a discussion with me in regards to that. And then that would be before I have them do it by themselves. So then I would have sentences like these. where we would do it together. So I would give them a sentence where it's not bracketed, so it would just be like a normal sentence. And then we would take our time first with me doing it by myself. I would read it. I would read it, and then I would ask rhetorical questions like, okay, so who's doing the action, right? What's the noun? What is the subject of the sentence? And then I would highlight it with that specific color that I already chose beforehand. And then I would continue the same thing with like, what's the verb? What is the action? Etc. After that, after modeling, after doing it together with multiple examples, so I will make it more hands-on. So to make it more hands-on, I would provide them with sentence strips. So like on paper, I would print them and I would cut them with different phrases so they can mix and match. An example of the matches can be the following. So these are just examples of like what I would put. Like each little line will be like a paper strip, and then I would just divide it, and they would make sentences with it. They would explain to me like why they put it like in the beginning, explain to me, okay, how do you know that's a noun phrase? Oh, why I know it's a noun phrase? Because that's the person doing the action. It's a little girl. Little is the adjective. And then again, same thing with verb and same thing with the next. And then the good thing about the sentence strips is that the sentences, for the most part, they're going to be the same, but they can also be really different. For example, for this one, it could be the little girl is dancing in the living room, but it could also be the little girl is dancing, where is it? Uh, the little girl is dancing at home, right? So it can change. So it goes to show that each pair or each group, they will have the sentence strips, but their sentences might be a little bit different, but doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. And it also shows like how a certain phrase can change the meaning of the sentence just by changing, the prepositional phrase and then, where it's happening, the action, or changing the action to doing something else. Or maybe the little girl isn't dancing, maybe is my brother. So my brother is dancing. Or my brother is reading. The dog is dancing if they want to make it funny. So it has them do it by themselves, but it also shows how it can change. Like when you change a noun phrase, a verb phrase, or prepositional phrase and put it all together, it can change the sentence. All right, to continue. So include a way to build students' meta-linguistic awareness. In this case, it will be related to their native language, which will be Spanish, and then English, which is what they're learning. So I will provide examples in both English and Spanish to make it more understandable and build on what they know. So this would obviously be before they do the hands-on activities. So I would probably show like a chart like this, and this will be followed with another slide with like examples of an English sentence. Together, we would group them and identify what specific phrase it is, but then I would show like the equivalent of it in Spanish so they can see how it's the same sentence and how we can do the same thing in Spanish and how it will look. So for example, the big house, I would show them, okay, that means la casa grande. And how it's a noun phrase, it's what we're talking about. The head word, right? So the most important word, the specific noun, right, would be house. Big is obviously the adjective, the is the article. Same thing, and then this like similar and different. How is it similar? How is it different? So it has the same head, different word order. So for example, for this one, the adjective after a noun in Spanish. This is something that some students like they read and they get a little bit confused because they see the adjective usually in Spanish after the noun, and then in English you see it before the noun. So again, it's a really good way to show the difference and have them look out for it. Then we go on to verb phrase is jumping. Head word is jumping. That's the main thing. And then we have it in Spanish, está saltando. And again, this example, I will show them how it's the same thing. They have a similar use of auxiliary, está, is, and then the main verb, which is saltando, jumping. Again, having them see, okay, this is very similar to in Spanish. I can use that knowledge and build from it to use it when I'm learning English. Then to continue, we have prepositional phrase on the table, sobre la mesa. Same thing, same function, different prepositional use, and word order. To continue, I will review it and show them how certain things in both languages are the same and how it can help them. Also, I will note the differences such as, again, like the adjective. In both English and Spanish, the head of the noun phrase is the noun itself, but its position in the phrase can differ. In English, modifiers, like adjectives, usually come before the noun. For example, the red car, red, the adjective comes before the noun car, while in Spanish, they usually come after el coche rojo. So rojo is the adjective, it comes after. We're saying the same thing, it's just in a different order. And then usually to show this difference, I would have a picture and really emphasize that we're talking about the same thing. It just looks a little bit different, the order. I would also point out how the verb phrases use auxiliaries in both languages, like is running, está corriendo. In summary, um, the way that I would do this is that I would review certain things we already done. I love doing that. The kids seem to always love it too. Then I will model marking then I will model marking phrases in a sentence. I would really practice, practice, practice and do it together. So students do it with me. And then that gives me other opportunities to see if anyone's confused. Then students work in pairs to do the same on a sentence strip. Then we would see what sentences they're using. I would ask questions like, why did they choose it that way? How did they know that they were doing it correctly? Things like that. And again, always they can use bilingual dictionaries to identify heads. To continue, we will discuss in Spanish and English. I do have the benefit that I understand Spanish and I can speak Spanish. So, like, if I ask the question and I see that they're really struggling in understanding me, I can translate it. So, I would say, like, what is the most important word in this phrase, right? So, what's the head? If they really are like looking at me like super confused, I would just translate. I would just say, ¿Cuál es la palabra más importante en esta frase? And then go from there. I would provide them English and Spanish phrase matching game. That would be the sentence strips that can also tag along so they can see how it looks. And I would also provide examples of sentences in English, sentences in Spanish, same thing. Provide English phrases with their Spanish equivalents. And again, students match them and answer guiding questions. So they're not just matching them at random. They had to explain it to themselves, or they had to explain it to me as well when I check up on them, like why they chose it. How did they know? So I would, say things like what word is a head in both phrases? What do both heads tell us? How do you know that's a noun phrase? What helped you figure that out? What helped you figure out that this is a verb phrase? Why did you decide? And so many things. So that is what I would do to help them see the connection between the Spanish language and the English language that they're learning for the first time, and how I would implement, teaching this specific content to them. So that's me. I'm Sheisa.